Welcome to the OTT Red Spotlight podcast. I feel very gifted to get time with Lydia Fairfax whilst she's in Dubai. It was over 2 years ago when I'd first started the OTT Red Spotlight podcast that I got the chance to interview Lydia when she was SVP of Commercial Partnerships at Warner Brothers. Today we're sitting here in the Raffles Hotel. Lydia, since then, has started Triple Crown Consulting, which has gone on to achieve some fairly distinct growth curves, and there's certainly a lot of lessons associated to that. And I'm looking forward to speaking to Lydia, not only to catch up on what she's been up to, but maybe more valuably to you as a listener, to hearing what it's like to go from working at a very senior level in a huge organisation to having to back yourself and start your own business. Lydia Fairfax, welcome back to the OTT Red Spotlight podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Delighted to be back, and can't actually believe it's just been over 2 years already.
I know.
It's been a mad journey for both of us actually since that time. So yeah, delighted to be here today.
Yeah, definitely. You were one of my first podcasts.
Yeah, after Fred, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, and like you've just said, I think there's so much that's happened since then with OTT Red and everything that's happened with Red Hole. And I've moved to Dubai. Triple Crown's gone on to do some amazing things, which we'll talk about in a second. Let's go back to where you were at that point in time. I can really distinctly remember how we came across each other.
Yeah.
And you know, I had seen that there were big changes at senior management level, Warner Brothers happening, and kind of reached out to a few people. We started a conversation, and you were at a really interesting juncture back then. And I don't think that juncture is too dissimilar to how many people in the media sector have felt since with what has been happening. Reacquaint me and everyone that's watching or listening with what was happening in your career and your life at that point.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're absolutely right. I look back now and I'm sort of amazed that I was able to put such a brave face on our podcast. I mean, I know, I shared some sort of insecurities that I'd had at the time, but it was a very tricky time for me. I'd been at Discovery for just over 10 years. We had, I'd moved up through the business. And, a place like any big corporate, particularly US corporate, it is very much that kind of eat or be eaten. And, if you're not being promoted, you're basically, moving on. And so I, entirely embraced the Kool-Aid around that and spent the entire 10 years sort of looking for the next opportunity, for the next position, the next growth, the next team, the next region. And I suppose in the middle of 2022, I'd just come off the back of a huge deal in the UK. And this is when it all coalesced with the Warner Brothers Discovery merger. And I was asked at that stage to come up with a succession plan and a kind of an idea of how I thought my team would look in a new environment, with Warner Brothers coming in and being very strong in the US, and then us having a sort of a bigger footprint in Europe. And spent a long time thinking about it. And in the end, when I submitted the sort of my proposed structure for the team, I went through it with the chief people officer, and she said, "This is all very interesting, but where are you on this?" And I said, "I'm not in it." And she said, "Well, why is that? What's the next role for you? Where do you see yourself if not here?" And I said, "I don't know if I see myself at Discovery anymore." And that took me by surprise, and it had taken me a little while to get there. And I think it also took her by surprise. But particularly during the first half of 2022, I noticed a real degradation in my personal life, in my mental health, and in my relationship with my husband, my kids, and having come off the back of the big deal I was working on in the UK, and taking a bit of time out to, take a bit of holiday and not be working 120-hour weeks, I realised that actually, I had a conversation with teachers at school who were saying that that my daughter was quite teary every Tuesday morning, and then would be better again on a Friday. And I said, "Oh, that's probably because I go to London on a Tuesday morning and I come back late for Thursday night." Or, as it had become, this was actually becoming a 6-day-a-week thing for that final 6 months. And I was not sleeping at night. I'd be waking up at 2 a.m, heart pounding, not being able to get back to sleep. mentally working through deal terms in my head, not being able to switch off, and it becoming all dominating, to the extent that, even when I wasn't working on it, I just spend the entire time, checking my phone, looking at emails, responding to things. And I just thought, I just don't think I want to do this anymore. And I don't think I ever would have had the courage to leave Discovery had I not felt like I was in such a low place personally and mentally. But it turns out that actually, I know it's one of these sort of slightly trite things to say, but it was the absolute best thing. And I haven't looked back. I mean, I say I haven't looked back. I spent, 3-4 months mourning the loss of my role at Discovery and my team and all of that. But it was the best thing I could have done.
Isn't it funny how people that have only ever worked in corporates, and you did some massive things in lots of jurisdictions at Warner Brothers, isn't it funny how a job title becomes part of the fabric of somebody's self-perception and identity?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember at one stage my husband saying to me, I do not understand why a title is more important to you than the salary. He's like, just accept that, there was basically a time where they were trying to give me a GVP title, which was Group VP. And I was like, no, I want SVP. I'm stepping into my boss's old role. He's an EVP. I'm a VP. There's no way you're going to palm me off with some, half, promotion. And I got it. But at the time, they were like GVP, but X%, X more money. And I was so fixated on the S.
Yes.
And it had been, and unfortunately, it'd been like that since I started Discovery. I started at director, and I was like, once I hit VP, I'll be happy. Once I earn over 100K, I'll be happy. Once I earn over, the next level.
Yeah.
Once I move from being a lawyer to leading the commercial team, and that goalpost just continues to shift further and further away, and then you're no longer happy doing anything. And to your point around the corporate, for me, I mean, I absolutely loved my time at Discovery. I mean, it was brilliant. I loved the people there. But I realise now that I am too much of a corporate citizen, and you can give too much. And if you don't hold your own boundaries, no one else holds them for you.
I could talk a lot about the equity associated to what I think is a cosmetic thing with job titles. I know that HR departments would challenge that in terms of job families and salary parity and all that sort of stuff. But as a recruiter, I know for both of those stakeholding groups how much that can be manipulated.
Yeah.
So you came out, you sat in that room.
Yeah.
You said that structure doesn't include me.
Yeah.
How did it feel when you walked out of that room?
I cried.
The world had changed.
I cried. And I then, and the lady had said, don't give me an answer now, have a think about it. I'll put it in, but I will say that we haven't included your role because there was another role, right, that potentially would have been something I otherwise had thought would have been my literal dream job at Discovery. And she was like, we'll just say that the reason you haven't put yourself in there is because effectively you're kind of manoeuvring to here. It'll buy you 2, 3, 4 weeks, something like that.
Yeah.
And the relief of thinking, oh my God, I did it, but actually there's a way back. And this was just ridiculous. I should not have said that.
Yeah.
Was huge. But I was having a coach at the time, and she just advised me to sort of sit with the discomfort. And I still really struggle with that. I find it very difficult to embrace discomfort and to sit and lean into it. I feel like I need to address it, act on it, push it forward rather than just allow it to sort of percolate and actually make you realise what it is you really want to do. But I did hold my ground eventually after, a little bit of kind of internal wobbling, or certainly within my, sort of personal group of friends and family. But even then, on my last day, I was absolutely sobbing. It felt like a bereavement. And I think I might have said that to you 2 years ago.
Yeah,
it really did. I mean, it was a quarter of my life and a half of my career that I'd spent at Discovery, and I'd literally given it my all. And I suppose I felt, in some ways, like, what on earth am I walking away from? This is, well, in fact, my counterpart there said, "This is an act of career suicide, Lydia."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a powerful statement
Yeah.
to hear, especially with how delicate you were
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
that time.
Absolutely.
So then what happened? I was probably one of a number of people that you were taking counsel from
Yeah.
and building relationships with and looking for that bridgehead towards whatever the next chapter would look like.
Yeah.
You were sitting at home trying to make your mind up.
Yeah. I was fortunate that for, what seems to be completely unusual, we had a really nice summer in Wales. It was glorious weather. I remember taking a lot of walks on the beach. I'm not great in my own company. I really thrive off the energy of being around other people. So I struggle on my own. And initially I'd be like, anybody want to take a walk with me to the beach? Please, anyone.
Yeah.
But I didn't, and I spent a lot of time walking a particular route along the sort of the coastline in South Wales near where I live. And I did some gardening, and we went to Scotland, and I basically decided just not to worry about it until September. I thought, right, I'm going to give myself the entire summer without going on LinkedIn, without, manically chasing recruiters, without sort of saying, hi guys, open for work, and starting the sort of the banging on the doors.
I remember you saying that to me.
Yeah.
You were like, no, I'm not going to rush this. I'm going to be stealthy about making the decision.
And few people who'd been in a similar situation to me had said the same thing. Don't squander this. Don't squander it by jumping head first. Because I was adamant that I was just going to go straight into another corporate, right? That I'd go and look for another very similar level job, maybe even promotion. That sort of stay on the hamster wheel, earn more money. And I decided just to sort of like give myself that 2 months off. And actually, it was I'd love to say that I created some fabulous business plan and I had this lovely pipeline of work, but it didn't happen like that. I had a phone call from an old colleague of mine at Discovery who had moved to ITV, and he phoned me and he said, I don't know what you're thinking of doing and where you are in your head, but ITV is looking for someone to cover a role which has been moved internally, and because it's an internal move, there's no notice period, so they need somebody immediately, but it's probably going to be 3-6 months max.
Yeah.
And I thought, it's a bit soon, not really sure, but it's only 3-6 months. I can still look for jobs during this time.
Yeah.
So I did a very quick, a very quick Companies House registration of a company name, adopted the vanilla articles of association, literally just bosh,
Yep.
and started working for ITV. And then it kind of grew from there.
I think it's important, Lydia, because I know where you were then, not to overlook the fact that you were seriously considering starting something yourself. And I hope you don't mind me touching on this, but I know one of your concerns at that time was, Chris, I'm just worried that if I go consulting, that the perception of the market will be that I've been put on the shelf. They were your words. I remember them.
Yeah.
How did from where you were then and what happened to create Triple Crown? Because now I'm sure that you would talk about it in an extremely different way. You created something with Triple Crown.
Yeah, I did. And I do feel sort of a quiet sense of pride about it, I suppose. But you're absolutely right. I really did have a fear, and I've always been, too concerned about, how other people perceive me and my, as it turns out, I'm sure completely unsurprising to you, but how intrinsically linked my career and my title was to my self-esteem and my identity. And how I, behaved in the world and where I thought my position was in the world. And some of that actually had a lot to do with having two quite difficult pregnancies and early months of being a mum, and feeling like I just had missed the handbook. And someone that's always been used to, if I didn't know something, just working harder and, reading more about it to make sure I knew it, it was it blindsided me to sort of be in a situation where I was like, I literally do not know how to be good at this. And I really felt that I wasn't good at being a mum. So the whole that I'm really good at my job felt even more important to me, if that makes sense. And so I think for me then it was so intrinsically linked to how I felt about myself that I was absolutely extremely worried that the perception would be that, as you say, if you consult because no one wanted to give you a full-time job, that you weren't good enough to be back in the corporate market. And I think that it took me a long time to get past that. I think one of the sort of the turning points was when in one of the roles that I had, I was offered permanent role out of it. And I said, no, I'm not ready to give up yet.
Massive moment.
Yeah, massive moment, because that sort of ticked a couple of boxes, right? It was yes, you are good enough. And effectively, you've been on a 6-month interview and they still want you. And, they are prepared to put you on the payroll permanently. And then secondly, a friend of mine, but somebody completely outside of the media industry. And I just remember saying basically something similar to this, those that can are employed, those that can't consult. And it's become this little, tagline in my head. And I mean no disrespect to any consultants, because I was saying it about myself rather than anyone else.
Yeah.
And he just said, I just find that such a bizarre way of thinking. He said, because don't you think that when you charge out your charge out rate, you are having to earn that charge out rate every single day?
Yep.
And he said, and what are your projects based on? I'm like, oh, some of them are like a month's notice. And he said, they could get rid of you tomorrow if they didn't think you were doing a good job. To my mind, you have to be better to be a consultant, arguably, than an employee, because you're so more readily, able to be got rid of if it's not going well. And that sort of really chimed.
Yeah. And for me, as you know, Lydia, I recommend that people talk to you. I kind of put you on a bit of a pedestal when it comes to what you've done and what I've seen you go through personally, emotionally, and then what you've achieved professionally, because I speak to hundreds of people all over the world, and the context of the media market is that it's changing so much, and there are amazing people on the market. And the conversation that we had 2 years ago is not dissimilar to one that I've had dozens of times since.
I bet.
And I think it's really important to bring your story to those people, because I think it will help them understand that some of their perceptions might not be accurate, and I'm not going to disclose what your numbers are, but you shared with me the success that you've generated yourself financially for your family since starting Triple Crown. And we've also spoken regularly since then. And some of the projects you've been involved with are amazing. You're speaking on panels. You are still getting invited to panels, probably more so now.
Yeah.
And you're getting invited because of what you're all about, not just because of your job title in a brand.
Yeah. And that was another huge learning curve for me. I had, when I was at Discovery, and certainly when I'd sort of, was at SVP level, you do get a lot of requests through the PR and, the PR teams for speakers at events, right? And, a lot of it is because they want to understand what Warner Brothers Discovery's, next move is in OTT, or how the Olympics are going, or whatever that might be. And so it take me by surprise. And actually, it was really, sobering to understand that when you're just representing yourself in your own sort of mini little brand, you have to work bloody hard to get people to, want to put you on stage.
You've done amazing at that.
Though I feel like I had exactly the same opinions and exactly the same knowledge to impart that I had, and actually probably was able to be a bit more free in terms of what I was able to share and what I was, take a personal opinion on things, where otherwise you'd have to take the corporate line a little bit more,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How many of that? You've done quite a lot of that now.
Yeah,
You've become part of the circuit.
Yeah,
Lydia.
I have, and there's a guy at Google that I thank every day, because I paid for my first conference, and he said to me at the lunch, he's like, mate, you're missing a trick here. He said, You need to go speak to the organisers. You need to get involved with them. You need to offer your skills up and offer to moderate a conference. He said, and you will never pay to go to another conference again.
No, absolutely.
And, he was right. But, it's super important for me because it means that, when you're working on your own, you don't have that team. So having those touch points and those connections. And as you say, it's like a little family. You meet at these different events and you catch up, and then you might be at top of someone's mind, they might be top of your mind. I mean, there's so many times where people have come to me and they said, we're really looking for somebody or a vendor or a consultant, and I was like, well, that's just not my thing, but I know who it is.
Yeah.
And being able to pass it forward, so to speak, has been great, and it has been really freeing to be able to talk about my impressions of the media industry. I did a great, as in enjoyable rather than.
I'm sure it was great, Lydia.
With Nick on what do we think were the sort of the big sports trends for 2025, and what we thought all the big players were doing, and who might move for NBA, who might move for NFL and all of the UFC, etc. And it was so interesting, and I loved it. And I felt for a minute a little bit like Marina Hyden.
Yeah. But you know what? It's interesting. I think that the equity associated to you had a big title before.
Yeah.
But what people know now is Lydia.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's even more powerful. And I can imagine that it must feel quite liberating as well, knowing that people know what you're all about. You're not just riding in on the license of a big brand.
Yeah. I think the moment where that hit home was I did a podcast with Simple Stream earlier in the year, and they cut some little quotes and started putting them on LinkedIn before they dropped the entire episode. And there was one that had come out, and I literally saw it, and I ran to the loo. I was like, oh my, because I talk about how Netflix had effectively created a race to the bottom for content, and that people were not prepared to pay the value of content because it had been so devalued by these sort of $5.99 consume anything. And I just remember thinking, oh my god, I'm going to get into so much shit for this. And I was like, actually, by whom?
Yeah.
I'm my boss.
Yeah.
I'm entitled to that opinion.
Yeah.
But when you're working for a corporate, you have to be so much more vanilla in terms of what you say and how you might talk about the broader industry. So for me, that was really it felt really freeing, and actually it's sort of given me the confidence now to say, actually, I do want people to see Lydia for who I am, and that is, and there is an element of vulnerability around that. There is an element of imposter syndrome, and God, pinch me, in a minute are all my clients going to say, what have we been hiring you for the last 2 years? Get out of here. But on other days,
do you think you're becoming more confident about that vulnerability?
Yes.
Like it's just part of the fabric of every day.
Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to have admitted that before. But I can remember someone at Discovery who I looked up to very much saying to me one day that in the first sort of 5 years of her being this superwoman, that whenever she had to speak at a conference or she was being interviewed, she wouldn't pick up a drink because her hand would be shaking so much. So she said she would just literally sit there with her hands over each other on the table. And that resonated with me so much because I'd only ever seen her as this sort of ice queen and the most impressive and professional, and, didn't look as if anything would faze her. And it turns out that, some of the insecurities that I was feeling, she'd felt too. So I actually feel it's important for me to say that now, because if other people felt like I did, and everyone's putting on this, brave face of, I'm the big I am, and, I'm fine walking into a room and addressing a crowd of people.
Yes.
And not realizing that actually there isn't, some angst behind that, then it can only be a good thing in my mind.
I think that you're almost definitely one of the founder members of the OTT Red community. You were one of the first in there because of our relationship.
Yeah.
And I think you've become really well known within there as well. It's interesting earlier hearing you talk about, when you've got your own company, you sort of need a team. And I'd like to believe that you found some of
Yeah.
that. You know, I know you and Windsor, for
Yeah.
example, get on really well.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting seeing how in today's world, virtual communities getting comfortable with vulnerabilities and these kind of things that, you know, maybe it's quite antiquated to do what we used to do, even only 20 or 30 years ago, with the corporates bred into people, you know, don't admit vulnerability and all this sort of stuff. Actually, people expect that now. We know we all feel it. It's just part of being human.
And we are. And that's the point, right? That is what makes us human and not AI bots, right? Is the ability for us to be able to show that vulnerability, be able to respond in real time. I was talking to a gentleman next to me on the flight over last night, and he was saying, you know, goodness me, that's a very complex sounding topic, because I said I'd moderated a panel around how AI was helping broadcasters to improve fan engagement and monetization. And he's like, I don't think I even know what 3 of those words in that sentence actually are.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you know, I did have a list of questions that I had kind of, you know, spent some time thinking about. And he said, also, you know, what do you do then? He said, doesn't that mean you're just an AI bot because you're literally just reading it? And I said, well, no, that's the whole, you know, the story around it, right? You know, is you ask a question, but then the answer means you don't necessarily move to your next question because they've said something. And if you're actually listening and, you know, you develop an arc in your narrative, and that's what makes somebody human rather than an AI.
100%, absolutely. So let's talk about Triple Crown, right? Because you've done some cool things.
Yeah.
You've been involved with some really cool, really well-known projects in you know, a relatively short period of time. What does Triple Crown do? And then I want to sort of wrap up talking about what your vision is for Triple Crown. But
sure,
to give everybody a feeling for where you're at now with this thing that you've created and that's becoming very proven.
Yeah. I mean, you were spot on earlier on when you said that when people have been in the corporate for a long time, it's very difficult to productize or describe what your product is when you then go out as an individual or, you know, a company in this instance to sell your own wares. And it took me a long time to sort of work out what my elevator pitch was and where I felt that I would be able to sort of bring the right value to an organization. And I think that was difficult because of the way, you know, when you are at a corporate, you are very siloed. You know, your
marketing give you the deck and you just recite
exactly. And you do one area of it. Like at Discovery, for instance, even though I did commercial partnerships, we had another team. You know, we worked literally hand in glove, but they did the strategy part of it, and then we did the selling part of it. You know, it was literally as delineated as that. But yes, we worked together, but there was a strategy team and a commercial partnerships team. And I've now realised, having sort of, you know, honed the product over 2 years, that actually what I do best is bringing both of those two things together, is basically being able to go in and provide a helicopter view of what the industry is doing, where this organisation's place is in that industry, and how they can better monetize their content or better get their content out to more people. And that might be by way of being being a linear TV queen and, you know, launching a linear channel or a fast channel, or it might be in the OTT space. But it's also, and I think this is where I feel like I've been able to add more value, is being able to provide that bird's eye view and say, actually, the opportunity in this new ecosystem is going to be here, and this is how we should be moving your business towards that. Yep. And the last 3 projects I've worked on have been very much, you know, based on that premise.
When you present those blueprints back to the clients that you've had, are you still surprised at the reaction when, I mean, I'd imagine you get a very positive reaction when you suggest what the horizon of opportunity might look like.
Absolutely.
How does it feel to you now, knowing that all of that intellectual property that you create, that's paid for, that you offer to your clients, benefits the acceleration for of those organisations to go in whatever direction they choose to go in?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really pleasing feeling. I mean, I'm working for a particular client at the moment, and they are kind of one step. So they're a sort of B2B business, I suppose, and so they're one step away from a consumer relationship. And I've been brought in to have a look at what a future distribution strategy might look like. And sometimes I even surprise myself. They'll ask me a question. I think, God, I know that. and and then they're like, well, what's the market for this, or what are the sub numbers of this, and I, and 20 years or 22 years of working in the industry, it has, I have actually gleaned a lot of information that I hadn't realised that I knew, and being able to sort of pull that all together into a product, and be able to, hopefully add value and be able to sort of offer a different point of view from the way that they have previously been looking at their content, has been, it's really rewarding.
You can tell you still enjoy it.
Yeah, I do. Mm.
You're really enjoying it. You've been through a massive period of growth and reinvention or rejuvenation in terms of your own confidence, your sense of identity, all that sort of stuff. If we were sitting here in another 2 years, or it might even be a different country, we tend to choose jurisdictions when we do our podcasts. What's your vision? Like, are you just happy carrying on doing this kind of thing? Do you think you'll grow a business?
I'd like to, yes. I initially thought, if I could bring in half of what I was earning at Discovery, after when you sort of gross it all up with bonus and all of that type of stuff, then I'd be happy, and I'd try and limit it to 3 days a week. I should have known that that was never going to be enough. And so, obviously I've been very, very chuffed in my end of my second year to effectively double what I wanted to get to. So
amazing.
So that is really, I'm really enjoying that. At the moment, I'm in a unheard of position for me, where I've actually got pipeline out till the end of December 2025.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Which is great. And I'm, really happy about that. But I've been approached about a couple of other bits of work that I'd really like to do. So I suppose the short answer to your question is, I would love to be able to bring one or two other people into the Triple Crown consulting world, and to be able to sort of grow and be able to bring some juniors up through the business a bit more, and effectively create a mini boutique, really.
What a story. That would be amazing. Just think where you might be in 10 years. I think that's fantastic. Honestly, I think it's brilliant. Final question for you. If there are people watching or listening to this, and I'm confident there will be, who are thinking, that's how I feel, they're my perceptions. I feel vulnerable at the moment, and my job title maybe has become my identity. What would be your advice to them? If it was a one-on-one conversation with them, what would you say to them?
I would say, and I have said to a few people actually that you've introduced me to, and to others, that it's all about just getting up every day and getting out there and talking to people, and more than talking to people, listening to people, and just trying to educate yourself as much as you can about what's happening in the industry, trying to connect the dots, try to sort of see where there are themes, spend a bit of time reading all of the, I spend probably 2 hours a day reading all of the kind of the media press. I subscribe to like 1 million different subscriptions and podcasts, and and if you're in an industry which you like, it's just as good as listening to a true crimes podcast, because it's just equally as fascinating. And then I think for me, it's all about the relationships. I heard this phrase once, and I know that my husband's going to raise his eyebrows, because I must say it about once a week. But it's all about pulling everyone up with you. Making sure that if you can't do the work, that you're passing it to somebody else, and that you're celebrating other people's successes, even if their success comes at they get the role that you did, they get the job that you didn't, for instance. And the expression that I love is, blowing out somebody else's candle doesn't make yours grow any brighter.
Yeah,
I love that because it's all about that. It's about, if you push everyone up, the tide rises.
I think that's a brilliant place to extend my thanks to doing this podcast, Lydia, to say congratulations on all your success. I'm personally really happy for you that we've become friends, and that I've had the chance to see all of your growth, and then also to document and journal it as well. It's becoming part of the fabric of OTT Red, and I think of the nearly 2,000 people that we've got in that community now, a lot of people look towards your story as their North Star with what's happening with them. So Lydia Fairfax, for the second time, thank you very much for being a guest on the OTT Red Spotlight podcast.
Thank you. It's been my absolute pleasure.